Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Common Q Learning Week Day 3 is about to begin. But before that, let me take a moment to review a few technical details. Today's webinar will be conducted in English. However, it comes with English Indonesian subtitle. To pop up the subtitle, click the three dots icon on the right below, choose Caption, enable Translation, and choose the caption language either in English or Indonesian. This webinar is also available on our YouTube channel BPPK Kemenq RI. That's all the information. Let us now begin the Kemenq Learning Week Day 3, Navigating Change Together, How Social Connection Boosts Workforce Adaptability. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Kemenq Learning Week Day 3, Navigating Change Together, How Social Connection Boosts Workforce Adaptability. First of all, I would like to thank God the Almighty that has given us blessings to virtually attend this webinar. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Head of Financial Education and Training Agency, Bapak Andin Hadianto, Director of General Financial Education and Training Center, Bapak Gantilis Aryadi, and our special guest speaker, Professor Adina Yulia Dudau. My name is Fendi Setiawan Muktiaji, and I'm honored to be the Master of Ceremony at this event. Best regards to all participants who join us on the third day of Kemenq Learning Week. I'm very pleased to announce that we have hundreds of participants who are joining this event via Zoom and YouTube at the moment. Dear participants, to officially open this webinar, we are pleased to listen to the keynote speech by Director of General Financial Education and Training Center, Bapak Gantilis Aryadi. Pak Ganti, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mas Fendi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you to Day 3 of Kemenq Learning Week. First, very warm welcome and heartfelt thanks to Professor Adina Yulio Dada, Professor of Public Management at the Adam Smith Business School, University of Glasgow. We are truly honored to have you here with us, Professor. To all participants joining today's session, thank you for being here, whether you are tuning in from your desk, meeting room, or even a quiet corner of your home. We are excited to spend this time learning and reflecting together. The theme of today's session, social connection and resilience in the workplace, could be more timely. Change is everywhere. Digital tools keep evolving. Hybrid work is now the norm, and public expectations are constantly shifting. In the middle of all this, one thing stays constant: the need for human connection. It's not just about knowing the latest or tech or policies. It's about how we listen, collaborate, support, and grow together. At the Ministry of Finance, we believe strong relationships at work are just nice to have. They are essential. They help us respond faster, share knowledge more easily, and build trust when it matters most. That's why we invest in leadership programs, cross-function collaboration, and peer learning. Because in times of change, it's the connection between us that make the difference. When we think about future-ready skills, our minds often jump to technology, AI, automation, data science. But let's not forget the human skills, the ones that keep teams moving forward, especially in complex and uncertain environments. Skills like active listening, empathy, and emotional intelligence, building trust, working across teams and silos, creating safe spaces for people to speak up and contribute. These aren't just soft skills. They are now strategic capabilities. Research tells us that organizations with strong social networks are more resilient, more innovative, and better prepared for the future. This matters even more for us in the public sector. We work in interconnected systems. Success doesn't happen in silos. It happens when we coordinate, understand each other, and work towards shared goals. At the Ministry of Finance, we are committed to being a connector. Through our trainings, forums, and collaborative projects, we want to set an example of what the connected, responsive, and future-ready public institution looks like. So today's conversation isn't just about keeping up with change. It's about shaping how we move through it together. We've designed today's webinar to give you useful insights and practical tools. Our goals are to explore how social connections drive resilience and adaptability, share real strategies for building trust and collaboration at work, and inspire you to take small but meaningful steps in your own teams and networks. So I invite you to engage actively, ask questions, share thoughts, and reflect on how today's insights might apply to your everyday work. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Adina Yulia Dudau. She brings extensive experience across public, private, and non-profit sectors in Europe. Her research focuses on public management, complexity, crisis response, and trust in public service delivery. These topics that resonate deeply with today's theme. Professor Duda will guide us through how leadership, collaboration, and connection can strengthen an organization's ability to adapt and thrive in times of change. As we begin, I encourage all of us to reflect not just on how we adapt to change, but on how we can lead it by nurturing stronger connections and building trust within our teams. Let's make this session more than a talk. Let's make it a starting point for better conversations, better collaboration, and a more resilient future. Thank you, and I look forward to learning with you all today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mas Fendi, let's see.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Pak Ganti, for the keynote speech and for making the time today. We understand that you may have other commitments, so please feel free to leave the webinar at your convenience. Once again, we are truly grateful to have you here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas Fendi, and all of you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the main event that we have been waiting for. But before that, I would like to make a housekeeping announcement for our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't mind, please keep your camera on and your microphone muted throughout the entire session. Second, the talk will go on for about 45 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A session. Feel free to ask your questions, and there are several ways to do that. If you are joining from Zoom, either write down your questions into the Zoom chat to which I will read them, but we encourage you to raise your hand during the Q&A. If you are joining us through live stream on YouTube, please write down your question into live chat. Last but not least, do not forget to fill in the evaluation form that we will share at the end of the session. Only those who fill in the form are eligible to receive the certificate. Okay, now allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Adina Dudau, who will deliver the topic about navigating change together, how social connection boosts workforce adaptability. Professor Adina Dudau from Adam Smith Business School, University of Glasgow, brings extensive experience from the civil service, private and voluntary sectors across Romania, Greece, and the UK. With a PhD in inter-organizational management and research expertise in risk management, complexity theory, and public service accountability. She has published widely in leading journals and serves as associate editor for Public Management Review and Journal of Management Inquiry. Beyond academia, Professor Dudau also contributes to the public management community through leadership roles in international organizations and as Associate Director at the Scottish Graduate School of Social Science. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Adina Dudau.
Thank you so much. What an introduction.
Hello, Adina. Good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon. I'm great. Thank you. What an introduction and what an event. Thank you so much for having me. I feel on stage. I probably am on a virtual stage.
Yeah, it's okay. It's good to have you up with us today, Adina. And hopefully our event today can going well with you. All right, without further ado, Adina, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Question from me, because I don't know if I see what you see on the screen. Do you see my slides?
Yeah.
And are they on presenter mode?
Yeah. We can see your slides and yourself in our screen.
Okay, and they are on presenter mode, so I'm presenting, right? Great. Tito is nodding, so that's good to see. Thank you so much. Great audience, great opportunity to address you today. It's not every day that I have the opportunity to speak to hundreds of civil servants all in one go. Thank you. The introduction was very flattering, and therefore that reduces the need for further introduction by me. But I'm going to say that I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about navigating change, and particularly about doing so together. So how social connections boost workforce adaptability. As Tito will know in the audience, I'm very committed to this topic because not only I have studied various aspects of it, as I will show you today, because I will be drawing on my research throughout, but also at Adam Smith Business School, I lead on people, culture, and environment, and the extent to which people, culture, and environment bring about positive research. So I'm definitely committed to the cause and believe very strongly that connectivity between people makes a difference. Now, you will notice that I am from Adam Smith Business School, and Adam Smith was a scholar of many things. So chances are he had a thing or two to say about most things in the world. And you won't be surprised to hear he also had something to offer for today's topic. In his theory of moral sentiments, there is a wonderful quote, and you'll forgive me if I look in my phone for it, but you know, the language is peculiar, isn't it? It's not something that just rolls off the tongue. So Adam Smith says, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely, or to be that thing which is natural and proper object of love. So the way to interpret that quote is that not only is a person justified to pursue their own interests, so to be loved, but also to be lovely to others. So that connectivity, that social aspect of work and pursuit of happiness is important, was important for Adam Smith, and it continues to be really topical today. Oh, I don't seem to be able to change the slides. Okay, I can. Great. Why is this important? Obviously, we've had a lovely keynote just before this one where that was explained quite clearly. So I'm going to add a little bit to that, but not very much. Public sector organizations, but not just public sector, but pretty much in all sectors of the economy, operate in a state of constant change. And that was brought about, initially by globalization and the introduction of the World Wide Web, but it's accelerating ever more. So out of the recent changes that we have all experienced in the world, in Indonesia as well as in Scotland, we've been through pandemics, we've been through tech change, all requiring unprecedented adaptability. I'll apologize for moving around a little bit. I have two screens, in fact, three screens in front of me. Now, not all of these changes are successful, and it's a big discussion around what success even means, because one's interpretation of success is another's interpretation of failure. But by and large, a success at a macro level of the organization is pretty easy to observe. And about 30 to 7% of change initiatives fail in the public sector. And this is primarily due to lack of buy-in by staff. So low employee engagement, for example, lack of trust in the processes underpinning the change, all those hinder success in change initiatives. So because of that, it often feels that the initiative of change is like a roll of the dice, right? So it's the outcome of it is left to chance. So today we're going to discuss what it is that we can control, and specifically around social connections among staff and between leadership and followers. What is it that we can control in this process so that things are not left to chance, so that change can be successful in the public sector, although again, it's very much generalizable to other sectors. Building strong connections, so navigating the change together is indeed very timely and critical to boosting resilience. I try to keep my discussion a bit less abstract, so I devised a couple of scenarios. You may find these rather familiar because they are definitely familiar to me, and I do not work in the Ministry of Finance in Indonesia, nor in any other Ministry of Finance, but they tend to permeate all areas of organizational life, both in all countries, really. So scenario one, right? Scenario one of a change. Imagine or remember or acknowledge that the Ministry of Finance rolls out a new digital budget management system, a platform, really a digital platform, replacing traditional paper-based processes and also replacing a number of processes with just one integrated one. There will be a number of reasons for that. It could be to improve transparency and efficiency. It could be to improve control. It could be because of a perception that this is easier, or that it's an inevitable change because everyone else is doing it. Now, and this is happening in my organization as well. And if your organization is anything like mine, you will notice that many employees, particularly long-standing ones, find the change quite overwhelmed. To start with, there is a lot more input from the user. So it may take more time than the previous process did, even if the previous state of status quo was processes, so several processes. So in theory, should those should have taken longer. But actually, when confronted with a change, people may feel quite the opposite. So in an organization without strong social connections, people may not have a way to voice those concerns or to simply ask for help. And because of the guessing game happening and trial and error approach to their adaptation efforts, there will be more errors, decreased productivity, and so on. Now, in a place with strong social connections, clearly employees can ask help from their colleagues. And that help could be informal, but there could also be formal measures such as, focus groups, forums, coffee chat groups, and that can aid adaptation of people in organizations as well as the organization itself. Here's another scenario that's perhaps less about the organization and more about the impact of the organization outside it. And in the public sector organizations have tremendous impact on service users. And the scenario is, again, perhaps a familiar one. In response to an unexpected crisis, perhaps economic, perhaps of a different nature, the ministry introduces an emergency financial relief program. And because of the nature of the emergency, everything needs to happen really quickly and differently than it ever did before, which means there's a need for coordinated action across multiple divisions. There may be a need for a new division. There may be a need for new roles that are very quickly fast-tracked, introduced and fast-tracked. In an organization without strong social connections, the silo working of intra-departmental work, where people develop a certain kind of language and certain kind of shortcuts that are unfamiliar to those outside those boundaries, people will cling to those differences. Because they would simply not be used to working with others outside their bubble. However, in a place with strong social connections, people may mobilize informal systems of coordination, such as WhatsApp groups, as we've seen so many of during the pandemic, or using social media, or just picking up the phone, if that's even a thing anymore in ministry in Indonesia. It's definitely not a thing in my workplace, no phones anymore. But anyway, people would find ways to find each other because they've done it before. So they would have a habit to rely on. So these are real scenarios in which social connectivity makes a difference to change. So what I'm going to spend the rest of my talk on, so the rest, 30 minutes or so, is to break down the topic that I've been asked to deliver to you into 3 parts and just talk about each of those 3 parts. Drawing on the literature, drawing on academic research, and which I love, and I'm really committed to, but perhaps at times things may get a little abstract. So I'm very much open to your questions. I can see some activity in the chat, but unfortunately I cannot see the chat. So I rely on questions at the end of my talk. So navigating change together, how social connections boost workforce adaptability. I saw 3 components to this. One is about change itself. So change as a, if you wish, independent variable in research terms. Then workforce adaptability as a dependent variable. So the outcome of change and what we want to achieve through change, workforce adaptability. And the third component, and perhaps the most important really, the core of the talk, will be on social connections. So the means through which we get to workforce adaptability through change. So let's start with change. Change is ubiquitous, right? We make it sound like a big departure from the past, but really, almost every day or on a very regular and often basis, we find ourselves at the crossroad between the old and the new in some way. It could be a new process, it could be a new person in the team, it could be a new team, it could be a new boss, it could be a new building. So the new is always with us, and not necessarily in a dramatic way, could be in a pretty subtle way. Now, obviously, also the civil service is in the service of society and in the service of government. And with new governments come new policies, new reforms, and even outside that sort of inherently public sector context of essentially implementing government policy. There's also change, such as technological change, that comes from outside the sector and moves the sector alongside other sectors. And all these complex changes require collective effort. Technical plans are almost never enough. A plan can look marvelous on paper, but if the relationships aren't there, and if the capability isn't there, and the way to interrogate that capability, a way to find out if the capability is there and what it is there for, those technical plans are very likely to fail. So social connections could be an answer to the questions. Well, one of the answers, but the one we're going to focus on now. And the research shows that change agents with strong personal networks drive reforms. It's a very interesting research in Harvard Business Review by Batirana and Casciaro. It's 2013, so not exactly yesterday, but I found it so topical today as well. So I encourage you to read that. And I have a list of references at the end. Now, we also talk about change as in being one thing, right? So technological change, change of leadership, change of building. But in reality, when we look into any one of these changes, what we'll see is a multi-level dynamics of change. So wherever change comes from, be it from the top, or from the bottom, or from the side, it affects the organization on multiple levels. Often the initiators of change don't see all those levels. They know those levels exist in theory. This is why they engage in stakeholder engagement activities. But they simply cannot see what someone else does in a different side of the organization. And this is why change is tricky, because it means that some aspects of it are blind, I could say blind, to the change initiators. And this is why it's so important to engage. Because of this partial blindness or blind spots in the organization, we need to start from the assumption that the process will be emergent, that it's not 100% foreseeable what outcomes that process will yield. Indeed, micro-level interactions can scale up to macro-level change success, and it can also scale up to macro-level change failure. There is an adaptive process, there are adaptive behaviors. And what people do in organizations, as you well know, as you will have experienced yourselves, does not just affect themselves or even their closest colleague. What they do affects teams and even the organization as a whole. You know, it's almost a meso-level butterfly effect in organizations where something is happening due to a past dependency that started somewhere. No one is quite sure where it started, but it carries through the organization. Now with change, it's even worse because those past dependencies are disturbed. No one was even aware there was a past dependency to be disturbed in the first place. So it's very important to think of change as a dynamic process rather than linear, as it may look like on paper. On paper, it's quite hard to capture that dynamism. And this is applicable to moderate as well as large-scale changes, although there is research, and it's also quite intuitive, that moderate change is likely to be absorbed quicker and have fewer ramifications than large-scale changes. Now, how does the workforce adapt to all of this, to this multi-level dynamic change? Because this is why we're here today. It's not the change itself that we were in that policy area. You know, public health would probably have a level of uncertainty that the Ministry of Finance may not, or Ministry of Education may not. Sort of a smaller arm's length agency may be more agile and be able to absorb uncertainty and complexity in a way in which a large organization may not. But it is definitely a fact that government agencies operate in volatile environments, and that rigid bureaucratic structures may struggle to respond quickly to uncertainty or complexity. Now, there is a good reason, however, why they may struggle to respond quickly. In other words, there may be a benefit to that struggle. Bureaucratic structures are in place to protect certain values, public values, such as neutrality and universalism. Often change leaves certain social categories behind. So it is really important that the public sector does not shows conservatism. It's really important, that conservative side of it. So while it is often bashed in any discussion about innovation and change, there are good reasons for the public sector to be slow. It's supposed to be slow to make sure it serves the lowest common denominator and doesn't just move very fast, leaving people behind. But that also means that the people attracted into the profession are likely to be risk averse or to have developed an affinity for risk aversion. And again, there are very good reasons for that, and it's fit for the sector to be that way. But that plays a role in embracing change or adapting to change. There are also psychological barriers, right? So change and adapting to change isn't just something you decide to do. There are several psychological barriers that prevent people from doing that. It takes a certain level of confidence to know that you can adapt to change because maybe you've done it before. And if you haven't done it before, that may be a barrier. It takes a certain level of optimism to believe that there will be a positive change through that organizational change. And a lot of us develop cynicism, especially when we've spent a long time in the same organization. So we may not necessarily believe that the outcome of change is positive. So yes, with all these barriers, there needs to be some support to overcome the fear, the resistance, the disengagement that comes with change. The issue is, what kind of support? I've done a little research on that to show that it's not just support coming from the top of the organization, but sometimes it's the support you get from your colleagues. So in this paper, suggestively titled "With a Little Help from My Friends," we're talking about the role of teamwork in hospitals. Teamwork between different professionals, and the contribution of that to something that we call psychological capital. Well, it's not us calling it that. It's Luthans, Joseph, and Avolio in the book on the left side of my slide. And through psychological capital, we showed that safety behavior in public hospitals is improved too. And this is really important, this piece of research, because it shows that psychological capital, in other words, if you look at those psychological barriers there, psychological capital is about people's confidence, optimism, and resilience. So this piece of research shows that those qualities, that psychological capital, can be influenced by organizations. In this case that we report from, through teamwork. In your ministry, it may be through something else, but perhaps teamwork as well. So this psychological capital is quite important because it has been referred to as the adaptability mindset. Someone high in psychological capital believes they will find a way forward, expects good outcomes, has confidence in their ability or abilities through self-efficacy, and bounces back from setbacks, so has resilience. This is by all means the ideal colleague, the ideal worker, the ideal leader, and the ideal follower. So it's important. It's a psychological buffer during change. And I've showed in other research that it's a psychological buffer against other stressors such as red tape. And there's so much red tape, right, in the public sector. So forming and developing psychological capital as well as recruiting for psychological capital is indeed a way to ensure that people have that adaptability mindset. It's very important to remember that these capacities don't just happen to live in a person. Indeed, some people have that optimism. They just have it. It almost comes with their DNA. But it can be trained, and that's really important to remember. Next, what I would like to get into is social connection, because if psychological capital can be boosted by teamwork, then there is something really important in that idea that social connections, social connectivity makes the difference between change failure and change success. And these social connections could be formal or informal. In a bit of research I did actually from my PhD a million years ago, started about 20 years ago, but it was published in 2016. So my PhD research was about how organizations work together in formal connections. And within those formal structures, there were some people that were given formal roles as connectors. So those are formal connections. Those are sort of formal boundary spanners that I've seen in the public sector in England at the time. So that's one way of social connectivity, of implementing social connectivity through formal mechanisms. But there could also be informal connections. And Pallotti and colleagues have a wonderful piece of research on that. That refers to personal networks, colleagues, friends, across or within units. So not necessarily interdisciplinary in other units, but within yours as well. A bank of people that you could turn to for advice, for support, for information, not because it's their job to give those to you, but because they want to give those to you. The informal ties are, and they've also been referred to as weak ties, often cut across silos and are extremely important. They're often motivated by friendship or mentor-mentee bonds, and they're really important in that bridging form of social capital. And I'll speak to you about social capital in a minute as well. But both types of connections matter. So both formal and informal. Don't rely only on friendships, and equally don't rely just on formal connectivity. Now, I said something about social capital, and I called it bridging social capital. We people have access to a variety of capital forms. There is the sort of economic capital that we're most familiar with, so, you know, money in the bank. But there is also cultural capital that sort of ancient civilizations had and passed on to contemporary societies. There is health capital, and there is also social capital. Essentially, it's networks of relationships among people in a particular organization, community, country. It's often measured in trust. And trust is key to social capital, indeed. Because it lowers the need for micromanagement. It lowers that transaction cost that is seen as inevitable in organizations, and also perhaps particularly so in the public sector. And it enables collaborative problem solving, perhaps even more so under uncertainty. And we have a paper about this, myself and some colleagues here at the University of Glasgow, on the role of trust in offsetting control in the public sector. So trust in professionals versus controlling professionals, and the balance between the two. Someone with high social capital has networks, reach in goodwill and mutual support. They can draw on those networks in times of trouble, in times of change, in times of uncertainty. So that trusting foundation is likely to yield better outcomes in organizations. And it can be a glue, a real glue between people, and determine reciprocity between people during change. Now, social capital is seen at a sort of a macro level of community of people in organizations. If we are to think of people with social capital, then we'll need to go down to the level of the individual and their own agency in forming that social capital, in developing those networks. And there is a bit of research there as well in psychological safety, shared sense making, psychological capital that we talked about just earlier, and individuals motivators for action. So I'll spend a couple of minutes on that just now. Psychological safety is that feeling that you can be your true self at work. There's a lot of research on that at the moment. Albrecht and colleagues authored one, but there is a lot of research on that in our part of the world. Perhaps you could tell me in Q&A if it is in your part of the world as well, if that's topical in Indonesia as well. Research on neurodiversity in organizations and whether there is a safe psychological space for neurodivergent employees in organizations. Psychological safety is strongly linked to better performance. It's also strongly linked with innovation. And what is innovation if not successful change? It's something beautiful that happens when people feel safe, they share ideas, share concerns, and lead to problem solving through prevention, early issue detection, because they're likely to be more candid about those early issues. In a place without psychological safety and without the opportunity for the workforce to develop that shared sense making, people are likely to hide early detected issues, and that's not helpful in the long run. In a safe environment, there is open dialogue in teams, and yeah, that connectivity happens. But what's important to remember is that psychological safety is an individual level variable, and it extends to the collective when it's there for individuals. Another aspect that's important to touch upon, well, there are so many aspects that are important to touch upon, isn't it, when we talk about social connectivity? But one that shouldn't be left out because it gives a real tool for action for leadership is that of motivation. So what motivates people to get together and to be creative in solving problems, or to take an active role in a process of organizational change or even environmental change? Self-determination theory by Ryan and Deci offers something to our understanding of motivation and human motivation. It basically posits that there are four basic factors that account for people's motivation to do anything. And in your case, or in the case of today's discussion, people's motivation to drive change or be part of the change is predicated on the satisfaction of their basic needs for competence, autonomy, beneficence, and very importantly, relatedness. So people want to feel competent, so that they are not helpless through the process of change. They need to feel autonomous, that they are trusted to do what they're supposed to be doing in that process. Need for beneficence, that they can be relied to help others and not just help themselves. And very importantly, and perhaps bringing all the others together, the need to have close relationships with others in the organization. So the need for relatedness. You know that saying of, you can have successful change if you win minds and hearts in the organization. This is really about winning hearts. Getting people to feel and do so authentically. It's not about manipulating people, but about making sure that your process of change really has people at the center and makes them feel like they are part of it and part of the team that drives it. So the need for relatedness is very important. Now, the bridge between these sort of individual level factors that make a workforce more adaptable and sort of more community level factors at the level of the organization, the bridge consists of network brokers. In 2016, I wrote about, having all the structures you want in an organization, but without enthusiastic network brokers or boundary spanners, people that are willing and enthusiastic about learning how things are done in different departments and having friends in different departments and so on. Without those people, those formal connectivity processes and structures will not fully work. They are referred to as boundary spanners. They're also referred to as network brokers. They may not be formal leaders in the organization, may not have a formal title, but make no mistake, your organization depends on them. We talked about people, teams, networks, and it may be that we're thinking of networks as these sort of structures in this photo that are symmetrical, perhaps, throughout. If you imagine sort of this image times 10, and you'll see all those networks. But in reality, networks can also be isolated. So it's not just people that can be isolated, but also networks, and they become factions. And factions could perhaps be more dangerous to change initiatives than isolated individuals that don't buy into that. So it's important for not just the people to be adaptable, so not just the workforce being adaptable, but also the networks to be adaptable. Because that can influence the resistance or embracing of new initiatives. Excuse me. And insular networks, you could think of those as bottlenecks in the flow of change. It's important to get into these tight-knit groups and make sure they don't feel excluded. Make sure you include them in the process. So important. Right. Now, a lot has been said, and there is so much more research that I have not included. This area is fascinating. So I thought I would really crystallize everything in some key takeaways for civil servants and then for organizations. So what does this all mean for what you could do or what you already do or what others do that is successful? Build your network. Positively and proactively cultivate relationships beyond your immediate team. So beyond that level of formality that you've been hired into or placed into. Be a boundary spanner. And mind you, boundary spanners, they need to be intrinsically motivated to be boundary spanners. So if you don't want to be boundary spanner, that's okay. You don't need to do everything I'm suggesting today. Just a couple of things would be great. But yes, if you can and are that way inclined to speak to various people in the organizations and various people across networks, you'd help your organization a great deal. And equally for leaders in organizations, recognize your boundary spanners and value them, incentivize them to do more of the same. Nurture trust and openness. That's much easier to say than to actually implement, isn't it? There's so many ways around that. Well, it boils down to some basics, right? Keeping promises, sharing knowledge or not, guarding knowledge, admitting uncertainties. But of course, for all that, what you need is to experience that psychological safety. So there's something for you to do, but there's also something for organizations to do to foster that psychological space, psychological safe space. Grow your psychological capital. So important. Not everyone has that, as I said, propensity for hope, but we can cultivate it. For example, by taking on small challenges to boost our confidence. That would boost our self-efficacy. Celebrating progress and success. Every small success reinforces hope, and we can all be guilty of not doing so. I, for example, would work months on a project, and it's successful, and I'm happy for 5 minutes before I move on to something else. And sometimes I remember I should have celebrated it sort of the next day or late at night when it's too late to do anything about it. Yeah, don't do that. Just try to make it a purpose to celebrate every success, because that reinforces hope and that grows your psychological capital. And remember, psychological capital is the adaptability ingredient. For organizations, there's far more to do. There you go. I have 2 slides for organizations and only 1 slide for employees and for the workforce. What could public sector organizations do to foster that adaptability, which can come really handy in a process of change, but also handy outside that as well? Communicate a clear vision. Obviously, any change management textbook will tell you that communicating a great vision and hearing back what employees have to say about that vision is very important. So creating that feedback channel. However, there's far more than that. And in terms of what organizations could do to boost that social connectivity that can help, is, for example, creating cross-functional collaboration by task forces, for example. Really anything that breaks down silos and gets opportunities for employees to work with others in other teams. That deliberate mixing of perspective makes the organization more change-ready. Invest in trust and psychological safety. In other words, reduce the blame game and cultivate that environment of trust by rewarding candor, opening dialogue. For example, there are in high reliability organizations, there are near miss conferences. So places where professionals within that industry get together and discuss situations and scenarios that turned into almost an emergency and or even emergency, and then quite frankly talk about what happened. It is important for organizations to offer such opportunities for learning and rewarding without attributing blame. Now, this may not be quite as actionable for an organization such as the Ministry of Finance, and more for an organization such as a hospital or a nuclear power station. But there would be some areas of generalizability. And a definite sort of low-hanging fruit, in my view, would be to develop your employees' psychological capital. There is specific training that Luthens, the creator of psychological capital, designed. So training that boosts hope, resilience, confidence, self-efficacy, those components of psychological capital. And the research suggests that organizations can select people with high psychological capital. It's easy to imagine some psychometric tests to enable that, or they can develop it. And developing it is certainly more sustainable, right? There is no guarantee that selected high SciCap people are going to remain high SciCap people without any opportunities for development in that direction. And finally, encouraging knowledge sharing and mentoring, really converting informal social support into an organizational asset through certain activities such as lunch and learn, such as this one even. Very impressed with this learning week you have there. So that definitely helps with boosting that adaptability. Right, this is me. Thank you so much. And I am open to comments, questions, anything you've got for me.
Okay.
I will stop sharing so I can see you and maybe the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Adina, for the insightful presentation. Before we start our Q&A session, one key message we heard today is that successful change in the public sector depends not only on system, right, but also on people and their connections. Also, strong social network, trust, and psychological safety help employees adapt, collaborate, and stay resilient in the face of uncertainty. And most importantly, these capacities can be developed. Thank you again for highlighting how human connection is central to navigating change. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will go on to the Q&A session, because I bet the audience is very eager to hear more from you. All right.
I can see a lot of questions in the chat. By the way, apologies if I wasn't looking at you directly. I have two screens and I'm not sure where I'm looking. But anyway, I'm seeing a lot of, so apologies if I'm not doing eye contact. I'm seeing a lot of chat contributions. Do you want to go through them, or do people want to just...
Okay, Adina, I will read the question from you, for you. And maybe some participant also will ask directly to you. So you and our participant will interact each other with their question.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody here want to ask to Adina? Okay. All right. We have someone who has raised his hand. I would like to call upon Bapak Wahyu. Wahyu or Bayu? Wahyu, yeah. Okay, Pak Wahyu, please tell us your name and your affiliation, and please ask your question briefly due to the time limitation.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Wahyu. I'm from Kanwil, Director General of Treasury in East Kalimantan, in Samarinda. I have a question for, I think it's not really, I think it's quite important, because when we talk about, you already highlight trust and psychological safety between among the team members in the organization. And I believe that one of the important pillars is communication. So when we realize that there are two or more generational people in the organization, that it means that we need different approach in deliver communication. For example, between Gen X to the Gen Y, and also Gen Y to the Gen Z and other side. And how do we, I mean, how the importance of this, so that, because I think this, I'm sorry, I haven't heard the importance of the communication intergenerational that you explain, and maybe you can elaborate more about this issue. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, you're right. I did not talk about that. Primarily because I haven't done any research on generations. It's more of psychology type research, and I haven't done that. But I would imagine it's the same as decoding the social connectivity clues in a department. So a department would be using a certain kind of language and would be open to certain kind of processes. Similarly, within a generation, people code their communication within a certain type of language and are more comfortable with certain processes over others. How do we foster that? I suppose in some places, try for an organization to try to foster these connections, intergenerational connections, formally may be seen as discriminatory. So age being a protected characteristic, it may not go down very well to manipulating that formally. But as I think most things are better done informally, there may be creative ways of doing so informally, particularly when it comes to technology, because generational differences could be boiled down to digital natives versus non-digital natives, and then that becomes more actionable and less about age and more about technological capability. Hope that answered the question.
Okay, thank you, Bapak, for your question. The next person is Ibu Diana for KPPN Purwodadi. Ibu Diana, please unmute your microphone, please. Ibu Diana, we cannot hear your voice.
Check. Can you hear my voices?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
My name is Fitri. My name is Diana. I'm a staff at the Ministry of Finance. First of all, I would like to thank you for your insightful presentation. I'm interested on your topic, especially on building network. I believe you know that building network also requires energy, time, and of course, cost. We know the Pareto theory, also known as the 80-20 principle, that states that approximately 80% of the result or outputs of a system come from 20% of its input or causes. My question is, in your opinion, if we are going to build a network, how many people or how many percent of people in our organization, especially our office, are efficient to be included in the network? Thank you so much.
There is something very natural about human connectivity, about creating a network. And I think it's really important to not make it a job, right? So if you start thinking of the 80-20 rule and the specific parameters by which to build your network, I think you can miss out on the inherently natural process of it. So rather than doing that, perhaps look at who you like. So just completely disregard what other parameters, who you like at a real human level. And then the more you open up to other networks, so simply you being open to others rather than actively seeking them. And if you show your availability to others and they contact you, then you have the opportunity to choose just gradually and in a real organic way to choose who you want in your network. And it's not always a matter of strategic choices, although sometimes it is. But also people change, their roles change in the organization. And I always thought that the value of any colleague is in how they treat the junior colleagues. And when I was a junior member of staff, I could see well-respected colleagues not treating me very well, not knowing anything about me. And I sort of kept a mental note of those people. And the thing is, you're not always junior, right? You're growing in the organization. So what I mean to say is that forming that network and those connections needs to not be completely divorced from the natural process where you do that anyway with your friends. Having said that, not everyone is sociable, right? I mean, I am, but my husband really isn't. So that's also important and authentic to keep in mind. So if you're not sociable, but you're going out there as a network broker, that may not necessarily earn you any friends. I have a friend at work who is not sociable at all, and I remember asking him, "So how do you network? You know, in conferences, how do you choose who to speak to, etc.?" And he said, "I don't really. I'm just sort of minding my own business, and they come to me." And surprisingly, I've never seen him alone ever. There were always people gravitating towards him. So he found another way that felt authentic to him to have his social connectivities. So I would go for something like that rather than really trying to, make a scientific project out of it. Okay. Enjoy it, in other words, enjoy it.
Thank you so much for your answer. Thank you.
Then we have Ibu Alivia Astiwi Nur Aziza. Ibu Alivia, please open your camera and turn on your microphone.
Okay. Am my voice hearing there?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Dudel, for your insightful and engaging presentation. It really deepened my understanding of how societal connection intersect with public sector resilience. I'm curious to know about, have you observed any specific example from other countries or regions where societal connection were deliberately used as a strategy to improve workforce resilience in the public sector? And in your view, what can countries like Indonesia learn and possibly adapt from those practices? And building on that, how can public managers effectively institutionalize social connection and emotional support within their teams, particularly in highly structured environments, without compromising on performance target or operational discipline? Thank you.
Do you mind repeating the first part of the question about resilience and other countries?
Sorry, okay. I will repeat the question. Have you observed any specific example from other countries or regions where societal connection were deliberately used as a strategy to improve workforce resilience in the public sector? And in your view, what can countries like Indonesia learn and possibly adapt from those practices? That is the part one of my question, and then building on that.
I got the second one. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll start with the second one. So the balance or the counterbalance between performativity and social connectivity at work. Indeed, sometimes I feel that when I come to work, I spend way too much time on being social and way too little time on the actual tasks of work. So when I have a real deadline, I tend to work from home so that I can focus on the actual tasks. But what I also noticed is that when those connections are in place, that helps my tasks. So I'll give you an example. I had to deliver a large institutional submission on a particular topic that was not where I was a broker, if you wish. So I relied on others for information. Now, if I didn't have those social connections, I may not have known who to contact for information. And also the initial response to a particularly important question was, well, no, we can't do that because, and I could have stopped there. See, it was the social connections that allowed me to know who can look at this issue differently, more creatively, and actually give me an answer, even though the institutional answer is, no, we can't learn that. There are ways to learn that in different ways, and I had the people in place to open those doors for me, and this is where the social connectivity and the task performance come together, intersect. Sometimes you can't do one without the other. I agree, it's really tricky to keep the two in balance, so you could occasionally, isolate yourself from the world and just focus on the task. Maybe even I've seen some people putting a note, deadline tomorrow, do not disturb, or something like that. And that can just become a topic for, a joke once the deadline is behind you. So yeah, there is no word of wisdom on balancing the two, but what's important perhaps to remember is that you can have the social without performance, but you can't have the performance without the social in most roles, or in most roles I'm familiar with. There will be roles where you can just do well without working with others, but in many roles you can't. You need the others for the role. As far as, examples from other countries, I wouldn't be as arrogant as to assume I know exactly what you need in Indonesia, right? There is a large study called the GLOBE study. I encourage you to consult it because it's all open access, and they have a beautiful website. I just put it in the chat, the GLOBE, where they compare and contrast what different cultural characteristics from different parts of the world, and they show a map where you click on the country and you see cultural characteristics and what this means for followership, what this means for leadership. It may have been a good idea for me to do so before talking to you, but I haven't. So I will refrain from drawing lessons for Indonesia. Okay, somebody put something in there as well. Oh, link to evaluation. Sorry, nothing to do with GLOBE. So yeah, consult the GLOBE study. It's only a Google search away, and it offers a wealth of information on how people of different cultures treat social cohesion and other aspects of organizational life.
Olivia, for your participate with us. And next, we will have another. Okay.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Thank you very much.
Right. We have another person asking to you, Dina. Here we have Arisandi Joan. Arisandi, please unmute your. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fendi. Good afternoon, Indonesia time, Professor.
Good morning, UK time.
Oh, so there's morning in there. Okay. I'm Arisandi Joan. I'm an employee of the Ministry of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia. Professor, speaking of social connection, it's certainly inseparable from one's personality type, right? In your presentation, you not only explain the advantage of social connection, but also encourage them. My question is, in an ecosystem that supports social connection, is there anything this interconnected lifestyle can offer to the introverted individuals? This is considering that these individuals can only function and contribute optimally in a quiet environment and from behind the scene, far from the spotlight. Thank you for the time, Professor.
So are you asking how can an introvert do that? Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking about what this social connection culture can offer to an introvert to give optimally performance and contribution.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean the danger with any topic is that you focus on it and it appears that that's more important than others, right? So I painted a picture of a person that's a bit like me, right? So somebody who likes talking to people and is an extrovert and developed research on that topic their whole life. But the example I brought in towards the end of my friend, my very successful friend, probably my highest paid friend, is quite the opposite, right? So he's not by nature a social connector. I think he would have liked to be, but he's not. It doesn't come naturally to him. And therefore, he feels he would make a fool of himself if he was to pose into this network broker that he isn't. And it's far more authentic to just stick to what you do. Not everyone can and should be network brokers, because otherwise you'll have an organization full of unruly people that never stay in their own department, never do their own work. It's just connecting with others. And that's not desirable either. So there are two aspects of this. One is how people feel inside themselves. So do they feel in a psychological safe place in the organization to be themselves? And that's something the organization can work on to provide. Because if that happens, even the more introvert of us, and even those who don't spend their lifetime connecting with others, can make a positive contribution in a way that still connects them with others without them having to make that effort. So that's one side of what I was talking about today. And the other side is for those that have that ability and willingness to go the extra mile. Those are, if you wish, well, I was going to say something stronger than brokers, but so let's just say brokers. They are brokering these relationships so that others don't have to. Like anything virtuous in life, you don't need a lot of those to achieve good results. So if you listen to this and you're an introvert and think, well, yeah, that's hopeless, I'm never going to do that, that's fine. Pick up something you can do, such as developing psychological capital. And that means developing yourself. So your sense of optimism, your sense of hope, your sense of self-efficacy. And that would be your contribution to workforce adaptability. It doesn't need to be about you crossing borders and mobilizing everyone for coffee mornings to make that contribution and to show yourself as being adaptable through change.
Okay, thank you, Bapak, for your question. Before I continue, I want to make sure, Adina, there are so many questions here. Would you mind if we have another one person to ask the question?
No, I don't mind at all, of course. And in the meantime, I'm also responding to some chats.
Okay.
I can't respond to all of them, but to some.
Okay, maybe we will have another two people asking you, and then we will move to the next section. The next person is Ibu Pesona. It's your turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, Professor. My name is Basona, and I'm from Financial Education and Training Agency. Thank you for the great lecture. Actually, before this session, I was joking with my colleague about how social connections in a workplace is just like trauma bonding, but with a fancier name. Um, but as a part of
Absolutely.
organization, yeah, I want to perceive it like as something that we actually choose to do. And sometimes these connections exist in layers, like a circle within a circle within a circle. And as the circle gets bigger or the organization becomes more complex, especially during massive structural change, the way we build and maintain these connections need to shift too, right? That's why we need what you call connection broker. My question is, from a leadership perspective, how can higher level and perhaps middle level managers maintain the already established connections, especially the informal ones? How should we treat the connection brokers and informal leaders and also mentors and basically those who are willing to go the extra miles? And I was also wondering if compensation and benefits strategy will work in this scenario, and if it does, what type of compensation usually work best? Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
There are a few questions in there, and I didn't keep up writing them down, but there was a particular aspect of it that really, well, the trauma bonding resonated with me. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's bad, but it's good, right? But anyway, another thing that resonated with me is the idea of maintaining informal social connections. Typical scenario is when a new leader comes in from a different institution and they are not aware of these dynamics in the institution they arrive in. And by changing something or issuing a new policy, they can disturb those dynamics. So what leadership could and should do, in my view, to maintain those social connections is to get intelligence. And I don't mean somebody whispering in their ear, but rather get to know their staff, organize focus groups, organize lunch meetings, take some people out for dinner. There was actually an example that I remember from a PhD thesis of an Indonesian PhD student, an example of a leader coming into an open plan office and just simply getting there and reading something, and the dynamic became that people started coming to him. It was a him, and with all sort of ideas, problems, solutions, etc. So that became a bit of a hub, but naturally and informally. There wasn't like a coffee morning email going out. That just happened. So any way for leadership to get intel on the status quo and the social connections at work is important for them maintaining those relationships. The trauma bonding is serendipitous and should not be planned, obviously. Although, I mean, COVID led to some trauma bonding in organizations, and it wasn't something that happened in a planned way. But trauma bonding would be the silver lining to any unfortunate change initiative, right? Because people will achieve that social cohesion, although not necessarily in support of the change initiative. The maintenance points, I think, are more actionable. So thank you so much for the question.
Thank you very much, Ibu Ella. Okay, we will move to the last person asking. Bapak Agustinus Imam Saputra, would you please be quick, Bapak?
Good morning, Professor Andina. Do you hear me clearly?
Yes, very well. I love your background.
Okay, thank you. I'm Agustinus from East Nusa Tenggara, a remote area in Indonesia. I think in Indonesia we have a difficulty when we get a new placement because we have more than 17,000 islands. We have more than 400 regency with their specific tribe, habit, or culture. I think it's challenging for us when we move to another island. My question, have you ever conducted research compare the social connection workforce resilience between private sector and public sector? Because we have sometimes we know about the institutional theory when many organizations get the pressure from outside, they tend to homogeneous. The book I read from the Thompson et al. Crafting and executing strategy, they mention about Nordstrom and Co. Nordstrom Co. in US. They manage to make their employee, they trust the employee to be happy first. There, from that, and the connection has become strong. They maintain their customer and become the best company in giving service to their customer. Have you ever conducted research the different public sector and private sector? Because we need the best practice. Maybe we can imitate like the isomorphism. We can make imitation from the private sector. Because as you know, we work as a government officer, civil servant. We have a rigid hierarchy. And
excuse me, Bapak, that would you please to be more...
That way, I stop my question right now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I got the point. There are two questions in there, or maybe more, but there are two aspects to your questions. One is public versus private, and another one is the role of enjoyment or happiness to organizational outcomes. So the first one, public versus private. Yes, I have done research in that, but in particular professions. So, for example, we compared public versus private sector nurses. So, nurses working in the public hospitals versus private hospitals, and non-profit hospitals as well. And what we noticed is that psychological capital was higher in the private sector. And we sort of hypothesized that there may be less emotional labor for nurses working in the private sector, because the nature of the cases they encounter are so the patient's issues are less complex than the ones in public hospitals, there are research hospitals, and some places that's the only place where certain conditions can be treated. Now, while I've done that research and we have that finding, I'm reluctant to generalize across the entire public sector, across all countries in the world, and across the entire private sector. Sometimes there are more similarities within industries than there are similarities within the public sector or the private sector. So to give you an example, the critical infrastructure industry, so for example, energy companies, they could be in the public sector, they could be in the private sector, depending on the country. But there are more generalizable features of energy companies, regardless of the sector, than there are generalizable features of public sector versus private sector. So yes, there is research being done, but context is important. Public sector is not the same in every country, nor is private sector. So context is very important. The second part of your question is about happiness at work. Very important. And I said today two things that link to that. One is the motivators, people's motivators to achieve intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is what is when the nature of what we do motivates us and want to do more of, and the role of relatedness in informing that intrinsic motivation. So sometimes, for example, you could say yes to a task just because you like the team the task is in. Or you like the people you'd be working with. Don't really care too much about the task itself, may not care too much about the pay or the location, but you really want to work with those people. So that means that organizations can exploit people's need for relatedness, or exploit in a positive way, not in a negative way, need for relatedness to foster their intrinsic motivation to do something. So that's one thing. Another thing that I mentioned today that's related to happiness at work is psychological capital. So that optimism, hope, self-efficacy, those are also markers of a happy workforce. So yes, definitely on board with that.
All right. Thank you, Bapak, for your question. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of our Q&A session. But before we end this today session, Adina, I would like to ask you, is there a few last message as a closing statement you would like to address to our audience?
Yes, well, I'm gonna end with Adam Smith, right? I'm a big fan of his work and of his theory of moral sentiments and the importance of sympathy with others. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, it's important to maintain a level of sympathy with your fellow others, and that will make you better employees or a more adaptable workforce. It will also make you better leaders. So leading with empathy, really important in navigating change, and not just navigating change, really important in working and living with purpose. Thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to have been here today.
Thank you very much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand to Professor Adina Yulia Dudal. Thank you once again for making the time, Professor. See you next time.
Thank you. See you. Maybe in Glasgow one day. Bye.
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 Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very interesting discussion today, and now we come to the end of CommonQ Learning Week Day 3. To all participants who join us today, we would like to say thank you for your participation. Please do fill in the evaluation form by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the chat box to give feedback and get a certificate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Finally, I would say thank you very much once again. Stay safe and healthy. See you tomorrow on CommonQ Learning Week Day 4 with the theme Economic Resilience, How Global Trade and Cooperation Influence Each Other with Professor Corinne Krupp from Duke University. I'm Fendi. Good day and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.